Well, ladies and gentlemen, over the years, this gentleman has become my go-to man for everything World War II. I have learned such an incredible amount from Dr. Michael Fopp over the years, and he is so generous with his knowledge and his experience. And we're going to begin today with a beautiful topic as we discuss the life and the voice of Anne Frank. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Michael Fopp.
Thank you, Heather. Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is the only presentation I ever give where I don't put my name on the front of it, because this little girl's significantly more important than any of us in the room.
What General Weygand has called the Battle of France is over. The Battle of Britain is about to begin. This was their finest hour.
There's a few rules in public speaking. Don't speak or perform with children or animals, or try to follow an orator like that. Winston Churchill, of course, stirring the nation. I'm just going to illuminate it a bit for you with all the knowledge I've gained over my long career as a museum director and working. I was very fortunate because my father was one of the veterans. I got to know them very, very well. I also interviewed them during my career as Director General of the Royal Air Force Museum. So 3 of them are going to help us today. Sadly, none of them are still around. All these 3 chaps have a number of things in common. They were all very, very good shots. The reason for that was they had been shooting from a very, very young age. Bob Stanford Tuck on the left there, he was actually in the Merchant Navy as a cabin boy, as a very young man, and he was in this part of the world, and his captain was paranoid about large fish and sharks, particularly sharks. So he put Bob at the bow of the ship with a rifle and said to shoot any fin that you see, shoot it. So Bob became quite a good shot from shooting fish, would you believe? The chap in the middle, Dolfo Galland, he lived on a pretty large estate in East Prussia, the German part of Poland, the corridor, and he had a lot of wild boar on his land, or his father's land, so he became a very good shot. My dad over there on the right was born in South Australia in Adelaide, or near Adelaide. His father was a fruit farmer. And in those days, there was a very big problem in Australia, as many of you may know, about rabbits with myxomatosis. And children used to shoot rabbits and get a bounty for each tail they took into the town every week. And he used to make his pocket money up by shooting rabbits. A Merry Christmas, everybody. I'm from England. My wife, who's at the back and comes with me on all these voyages, and waves her arms at me if something goes wrong with the screen or with the music or whatever. It's great help to me, but she doesn't normally get involved in my presentations. But on this one, when I told her gas masks were involved, she was right up for it. 1941, therefore, after the Americans came into the Second World War, there was a great sigh of relief in Great Britain. And also we'd stopped having bread that you could call bread. We had what was called the national loaf. Is there anybody in anybody in the audience old enough to remember, or young enough to remember a national loaf? It was, yes, Frank, I thought you'd probably could. Yes, Frank and I have sailed before. He always puts his hands up because he was around at the time. It was not a nice piece of bread. It was more like a soft brick than a fresh loaf. And here we have the Americans have arrived, and they're encouraged to spend Christmas with the British family. Not only for cultural reasons, they were a long way from home. So to spend Christmas with a family was a surrogate family for themselves. And friendships were built as a result of those, not just Christmas, but right the way through their service in the UK, that exists to this day. And on the last night of the cruise, I'll be talking about the GIs coming to the UK and the influence they had on British culture.
Who knows, I don't want to hear the answer, but who knows the term got any gum chum? The couple of Brits that are in here, only the Brits will know. This is what the English children said to every GI they saw. Got any gum chum? And the answer was, have you got a sister, mister? And 3 million GIs came to England, ladies and gentlemen, 3 million. Their first impressions were it was cold, it was wet, it was muddy, it was dirty, the food was uneatable. The other thing they had to get used to was the bicycle, because the first people who came were the airmen. The first part of the war was dealt from the air. The guys that were going to go to Normandy, they didn't come until later on. The first ones that came were airmen. So they suddenly had to occupy 120 new airfields. Some of them occupied RAF airfields, but 120 new ones were built. And they were all in the countryside. Most of them were in East Anglia, which is just northeast of London, in the flatlands closest to occupied Europe. And each one of those bases, and they were very close together, near little hamlets, little villages, had 3,000 young men suddenly appear. End of a mission. These photographs are priceless because they record the jubilation of getting back and surviving. They're P-51 pilots of the 56th Fighter Group. There's only one difference between God and a fighter pilot, and that is that God doesn't think he's a fighter pilot. So these guys have come back from probably as far away as Berlin. They've been in the air for 8 hours. You can imagine what the first thing was they did when they got down. But the second thing was they had a cigarette, and then they told each other lies about what they'd been doing all morning. They embellished whatever they'd been doing, because they probably all claimed the same aircraft 3 or 4 times. But here they are. You can see they're happy to be home. And also, you mustn't forget that in every air force in the world, the aeroplane is owned by the ground crew. They lease it to the pilot for the missions. And indeed, he has to fill out a form and sign it and give it to him, say that he's taking the aeroplane away. That's the way the system works. So when the aeroplane is absent, the ground crew are really, really worried, on tenterhooks, waiting for their pilot or crew to come back. Of course they want them, they're friends. They rely on each other so much. They rely on him bringing the aircraft back for them to maintain. He relies on them to maintain the airplane so well that it brings him back. So it's a very, very close relationship. So they're waiting and they want to know how well their guy's done. So they want to hear just as much as they want to tell each other. The ground crew want to hear what he's done. And also the damage on the aeroplane they want to know all about, so they can do what you saw earlier, make the repairs. On the right here, they're getting down to probably a bit of an intelligence brief. This is the winter of 1944. So there's snow on the ground, glorious bright blue sky, which is wonderful for fighter pilots, very bad for the targets. And they're all chatting away about the last mission they had. The people. The Red Cross girl would go around with donuts and coffee all the way around the perimeter to where they were working on the dispersed aircraft. She would take a jeep or a truck, and she would go around and give them their donuts and coffee. She would also write letters for those who couldn't write, but also the British families that the GIs got to know when they went for their teas and whatever. I told you about them eating the whole week's ration or whole month's ration. That was soon understood by the American authorities. So if a GI was invited to an English home for Sunday tea or whatever, he would be able to go to the commissary and he would be given a box. And the box would contain the rationed items that the British had to wait for. So butter, sugar, maybe a couple of eggs, maybe a box of powdered egg if they were really lucky, which is equivalent to a dozen eggs. He would be given a box to give as a gift. And then, if you like, he didn't feel so bad about eating what was usually as much as they could provide for him. He wouldn't feel so bad, and the authorities realized that system worked. And of course, it made the Brits even more inclined to invite a GI for tea, because they're going to come with presents. So the Red Cross and the British public and lots of women, as a result of the relationships the mothers built up with the GIs, they became surrogate mothers. So you have a lot of cases of the mother writing to the mother in the States saying how her boy was doing. So you'd get a relationship built up between the families, which still exists to this day. I'm sure there are people in this audience that can confirm that. So the Red Cross Girl and the Red Cross clubs, they were set up in all the big cities, and they were open 24/7, and they provided for $2 a complete meal. They had people to write letters. They had everything that a GI would expect from home except alcohol. So hot dogs, hamburgers, Coca-Cola, 7-Up, whatever. This is the one at the Bull Hotel in Cambridge. This is a lovely picture. Again, winter 44. They thought our beer was weak and warm. And of course, the laws in the United States vary from state to state, but the age for drinking was often significantly higher than the age of many of these young GIs. In the UK, it was 16 to go into a pub. I think in most states it was probably 18 or 21 even to have a drink. So a lot of them were introduced to their first alcohol in the British pub. And also, the beer was rationed. The drinks were rationed, everything was rationed. And there's many cases of generous GIs walking into a pub and seeing 4 or 5 people playing dominoes or darts or whatever. And they would say, "What can I get you?" And they could afford to buy a round. There's one lovely case of the first time this GI did it, there were 5 people. The second time, there were 25. So their generosity went before them. People knew they were generous. So this is just a typical picture. Look how much is on the shelves. Virtually nothing, a few glasses. And the beer wasn't as weak as they thought it was. This is not Britain, but I just love the photograph. It's in Italy, actually, but they're all identified, they're all named. It's a crew of a B-24 Liberator, not the full crew, with a Red Cross lady, which is delightful. They also took pictures of their travels, again, Piccadilly Circus with the statue of Eros, which is covered up so it doesn't get damaged by bombing. Looks a little different now, but not a lot. Everybody by law had to carry a gas mask, so these are their gas mask cases. And this is the guard house at Nuthampstead, and they're waiting for the bus to take them into Cambridge. And you can see how they're dressed. They've got brown shoes, gold pants, really well dressed, and the sort of, you've got to have a 50 mission hat. So even if you've only done one mission, you jump on your hat a few times, you bend it, you make it look like you've had a headset clasped to your ears for the last 50 years. You would do, wouldn't you, if you're only 20? This is one of the finest photographs of the whole sequence, because this was taken at dawn around Christmas 1944. And this is a typical shot which I have never witnessed because I'm not old enough, but it must have been quite something. These vapor trails that you see up in the high sky are the forming up of the bomber formations. B-17s, B-24s, Flying Fortresses and Liberators. They would spend an hour or more just getting into position, and they would have special aircraft that they could formate on, which were easily identifiable. They would be old aircraft that were way past their sell-by date. All they do is they go up first and they circle at 20, whatever the level was they were going to fly at, 20,000 feet, and they would circle, and everybody from that particular group would have their own identifiable aeroplane on which to get into formation on. Some of them were polka dot colored, some of them were bright pink, some of them were striped. They were all different, but they were very recognizable to the guys that knew them. They would formate, get into position, and there were seriously large numbers of mid-air collisions during this period, because you literally had 1,000 aeroplanes climbing to different heights, trying to get into position, and then when the leader was ready, setting off to a stopwatch to Germany or wherever, in a particular way so that they were best defended against German fighter attacks. And they would set off a couple of hours before these chaps on the ground. So here we have the crews on the ground waiting to take off to catch up the bombers somewhere over occupied Europe and escort them, to protect them on their journey, perhaps as far as Berlin, perhaps even a little bit further. So these men are sitting watching their bomber comrades get their formations together before going over to Europe, and they're waiting for their takeoff time, which would also be to a stopwatch, where they would climb at twice the speed of the bombers and set off, and they would leapfrog each other so that they maintained, once the P-51D, which is what this aircraft is, came into service with its drop tanks, it could go all the way to Berlin and back. So they could escort. Up until then, it was significantly different. The GIs, the Army GIs, came over about 18 months, 2 years before D-Day to continue their training. And a large number of them were lost just in the training. When we were in Falmouth, just down the coast from Falmouth, there's a little piece of beach that was used for GIs to practice jumping off landing craft, scaling cliffs and all that sort of thing. Nearly 500 were lost on one particular day when German E-boats came in and attacked them. Training was even for the Air Force as well. Large numbers of casualties in training, never mind fighting against the enemy. And if you went to the D-Day cemetery above Omaha Beach, you will have noticed that the graves in that cemetery are not just from the 6th of June onwards. They go way back earlier with all the aircrew that were lost and are buried there from the bombing campaign, the combined bombing offensive of the months before. So the GIs started to move towards the south coast, the Army GIs, rather than East Anglia, where the Air Force was. They moved into the south coast. And camps sprung up, much like the airfields, for training purposes, all the way along the south coast. This meant that relationships started to build on the south of England as well, between the local population and the GIs. And then on around about the 1st of June, maybe a little bit earlier, the local people woke up and they'd all gone. This is the best kept secret ever in military history, I think. As you know, D-Day. Germans didn't know it was going to happen. They knew it was going to happen, but they didn't know when or where. And this is what they did. They just went. They just suddenly left overnight. And there were particularly young women going up to the fence, to what was the guardhouse, and saying, "Where's Jim? Where's Joe? Where's Fred? Where's Harry?" Oh, they're gone. They're gone. And the thing that hurt the Brits most was you have a law in the United States, a federal law, the War Properties Act. And that states that if you are in a country, in a war zone, that when you leave nothing behind. You leave nothing behind because what you leave behind could destroy the economy of that country. It could stop the manufacture or the sale of goods that you've left behind because they're freely available. And you can understand why that law was brought in. But in the case of Great Britain in 1944, when they left, they bulldozed the beds, the pots and pans, the bicycles. They just dug big holes and bulldozed them in. And Great Britain was in such a parlous state with the lack of virtually everything that the people lost their friends, their fiancés, their boyfriends, people that they had grown very, very attached to, and also a lot of stuff that they could have used. But there's a lasting legacy to all this. 70,000 British women left the UK to become war brides. Operation Diaper was those that had children, and the Pilgrim Mothers was what they were called. The Red Cross advised them to be alert, adjustable, and ready for change. And the English Brides Clubs existed. And they, of course, after the end of the war, May 1945, this is a Liberty ship taking troops back home. And this is the Daily Express, one of the cartoons showing a war bride and child getting home. And what I like is he's got a cigar, baby's got a cigar, he's got a gun, granny's got a pipe, older granddad's got a pipe, everybody's got a pipe, there's the chickens eating, even the little baby here, see. So here she's rather startled because it says, "Welcome home, Wally and his bride." He told her he came from New York City. And it's a very famous cartoonist called Giles, and the caption is, "But honey, where did you get the idea that all Americans lived in skyscrapers?" The impact on the British culture was significant, and we have it still to this day. We're two great nations separated by a common language. That's about all. The music, the lightness of touch of the Americans fed into our culture. The young people, the teenagers that were yet to serve, had seen how they behaved versus how their elder brothers, if you like, behaved, and wanted to be more like them. We became more relaxed. The films, of course, Hollywood made a difference. We learned about different types of food, new food. Our attitude to authority became more relaxed as well. We didn't just take it for granted that if it was an officer, we would, respect him if we didn't, and so on. We would give a lift to somebody if we were in a military vehicle. The family connections exist to this day, and they've been handed down. So even though the originators are probably past now, their families still are in contact. Children and war brides are obvious, and they bring, I believe, our nations closer together. But let's not forget the sacrifice. On D-Day alone, 4,900 young Americans lost their lives. And in the 8th and 9th United States Army Air Forces, in the combined bombing offensive of occupied Europe, Second World War, the 8th and 9th Air Forces lost 76,000 men between the ages of 17 and 25. So we must never, ladies and gentlemen, forget the debt we owe to both everybody in the Second World War. Thank you very much.